Women take charge in San Diego politics, the new faces joining the city council, and the priorities for Democrats as a new supermajority. Shipyard security on the San Diego Bay, an iNewsSource investigation reveals security gaps that could place Navy warships at risk. And a divisive debate on the border, the harmful rhetoric aimed at asylum seekers. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. Joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, David Garrick, who covers San Diego City Hall for the San Diego Union Tribune. Reporter Brad Racino with iNewsSource. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. And reporter Maya Srikrishnan with the Voice of San Diego. Well, change is the word at City Hall, San Diego City Hall this week, that is. New council members, new council president, new supermajority for Democrats, and a majority of women for the first time. And Dave, start right there with the new council president. Who is she, and is this a surprise?
She's Georgette Gomez from City Heights, and I would say 2 months ago it might have been a surprise, but it became clear after the election that there was a lot of momentum behind her, and now to everyone it just seems like the most obvious thing ever. Okay,
and take a step back, remind us what the president's role is in our strong mayor form of government. It's an important
role. Yeah, I mean, you set the agenda for the council, you assign committee assignments, which can be very political and can affect sort of how committees tackle big issues like racial profiling and climate change and police reform and lots of important issues.
Okay, and those...
I was just going to say, I think one thing that we've learned over the past couple city councils is that the council presidency is really only as powerful as the individual who occupies that position. So when Todd Gloria was council president, he led this council, this Democratic majority on the council to pass the minimum wage increase and some other progressive policies. When Myrtle Cole was the council president over the last 2 years, we didn't really see her at least, utilizing that position to really kind of lead on Democratic issues.
Well, I would agree, and Sherry Lightner in between Gloria and Cole was the same idea. I think the mayor wanted Sherry Lightner and Myrtle Cole in there because he's a Republican, and he wanted maybe the Democratic majority to be less aggressive on legislation. And I think he got his way, and it looks like maybe now he'll be less able to get his way. One, because I think Georgette has an aggressive agenda, and two, because it's 6 votes instead of 5.
Well, let's talk about that agenda. What are the priorities there?
Yeah, well, we've heard from her many times that her focus is going to be on equity. So she feels that her district and other districts in the city have been historically underserved. If you go to City Heights, southeastern San Diego, some South Bay communities, you see, really poor condition of sidewalks, really dangerous streets with, fast driving cars that people are just trying to get through, and without the kind of safety infrastructure like crosswalks or traffic calming that neighborhoods like La Jolla have. And so I think that her focus, she and other supporters of her have seen this mayor's idea of how to budget the city council's the city's money as kind of giving each council district their share of the budget, and each council member gets to say, well, these are my priorities, and he gives them what he can. And she feels that really what should be happening is that these underserved communities like southeastern San Diego, City Heights, etc., should be getting more money because they're further behind on infrastructure and other things that we all want in our neighborhoods.
Well, we've got a bite that neatly sets it up. We'll come right back to you, Dave, but we got a bite from the new council president. Let's hear that.
I'm definitely very mindful of having the supermajority, and it is definitely something that I'm going to try to work very, very strongly to keep a strong coalition together. But having said that, I am very hopeful that I'm going to be able to come to the mayor and really lay out our vision as a council and hopefully move it forward in a way that it's not going to be as challenging, that we're all embracing it. But if need be, yes, I'll definitely will be using the supermajority.
Dave?
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I think Georgette views herself with Vivian Moreno, who was newly elected to represent District 8, and then Monica Montgomery, who's been newly elected to represent District 4. Those are the 3 most low-income districts, council districts by a mile. And I think she views that as sort of a triumvirate where they can lobby together aggressively for what Andrew was talking about. It's because communities like Rancho Bernardo and even Claremont and certainly La Jolla, they have developer impact fees. They're just structured so differently tax and revenue wise that these other communities are so far behind. And the question is, should it be an equitable distribution of tax and property tax revenue, sales tax revenue, or should we have an inequitable distribution to try to help these other communities catch up? And I think Georgette wants to go with the, not that it's unfair, it's inequitable to try to equal things out.
I think that she would say that is equity, though.
Right.
That equity is trying to lift all the neighborhoods up to the same level, and in order to do that, some neighborhoods might need more resources than others. So.
Makes sense. Well, she has an environmental background here. Climate change, of course, is the key issue, local, state, federal, international. And we have a pretty aggressive climate change action plan in San Diego in place.
Well, we do, but a lot of critics say that while the mayor has said all the right things, there's questions about how he's financing stuff, both short-term and long-term, and whether the goals they've set they can actually meet. So I think Georgette might be a little bit more of a no excuses type of approach on that with the mayor. The mayor controls the staffing and how that gets handled, but the council can certainly hold him accountable and be more aggressive and more critical when they don't think he's meeting the goals of the climate action plan or has a viable plan, coherent plan to get there.
And I think one thing that we haven't mentioned yet is that the council president also gets a seat on the SANDAG board of directors.
The county government.
And so this is the regional agency that distributes transportation spending across the county. And so Georgette has been a fierce advocate for safe, active transportation infrastructure, so biking and walking, also public transit. She does chair the board of directors of MTS. And so I think one thing that we can expect from her, being a new voice at SANDAG, is trying to prioritize these more sustainable and greener forms of transportation as SANDAG puts together their next regional transportation plan. That they've been under a lot of criticism for a long time from environmentalists about prioritizing or putting too much money into roads and freeways, which are a driver of climate change here.
Right, Dave?
And I think all that's true, but keep in mind the number one issue at City Hall is the housing crisis. Mm-hmm. Every council member will tell you that there's not enough affordable housing in San Diego. It's been blamed for the homelessness crisis. It's a big part of the whole thing. And I think Georgette's take would be that we need more housing. We need more housing, particularly for lower income and middle income people, and that developers are going to have a lot harder time getting their projects approved at City Hall the way they have been in the past. I think she would say business as usual is over. There's going to be a more aggressive stance by the council to make sure that projects include on-site low-income units, subsidized low-income units.
Another new member of the council is a scientist, which is something different.
Well, a physician. Jen Campbell.
But a science background. What will she bring now?
So Jen Campbell, representing District 2, she unseated Lori Zaff, who had been in there since 2010. And so I think from Campbell, she's a bit of a wild card. She's a political newcomer. She's never held elected office before. The other two new council members, as David mentioned, Monica Montgomery and Vivian Moreno, have worked at City Hall before. So we'll kind of have to wait and see what we hear from Campbell's office. Yeah, anything to add?
I think it's interesting, though. As you could say it's scientist, but I think the reason she calls herself that is to point out that she might look at things from a different perspective, from a scientific perspective. And we should mention that Monica Montgomery is an attorney. Prior to her election, there were no attorneys on the city council. So now we went from no attorneys and no doctors, and we have one of each. An interesting perspective to add in. I'm not sure what it's going to bring to the table, but I think it could be helpful.
We'll find out. Before we leave our segment on politics, Andrew, you had a exit interview this week. Ron Roberts been around to talk about a guy in government for a long time, 30 plus years. Tell us, what's his take? You mentioned the housing crisis, and we're going to get to a bite from him and all, but give me a couple of high points of what he said in your interview.
Yeah, well, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about public health. He started his career in public office. He was pretty instrumental in establishing the city's first AIDS hospice. He's been a leader on the county's Getting to Zero campaign, which is a goal to get to zero new HIV infections by 2026. So I think he's really proud of that legacy. He ended his term with the Hep A crisis. I think that's kind of a black mark on the county's record. He has his explanations for why things played out the way they did. But in terms of housing, he's really a big supporter supporter of low income and affordable housing from the county. He's tried to get a number of projects approved in order to, get that, fill that void that really exists in San Diego.
And a real moderate Republican, and you've nicely set up our bite from Robert, so let's hear what he has to say.
But the fact of the matter is, there was a time, I think, when we responded. In that case, I think over 3,000 units were built in very, very short order. We couldn't do that today if our lives depended on it. We have rules and regulations that are well intended, but they're used by people largely to say, no, we don't want housing. And if you say affordable housing, we don't want them. The fact of the matter is, right across the board, we're not building adequate numbers of housing in San Diego.
So Roberts there was referring to the fact that he grew up in public housing and housing that was built during World War II in very large projects that have since been torn down. But he's saying, we used to actually take this problem seriously, and since then we've lost our way and we haven't really made this a priority.
Well, we'll see what happens going forward because we're out of time on this segment, but new faces there as well. Not all Republicans anymore. We'll talk about the supervisors more and shows to come. We're going to move on now. Well, it's been nearly 20 years since the deadly terrorist attack on the USS Cole in Yemen. Ever since, the Navy has been well aware of threats to ships being worked on in ports like San Diego. But gaps in security at the main shipyard here are raising alarms. And Brad, start there with where the responsibility rests for Navy ships that are being worked on in the Bay.
So there are 3 shipyards in San Diego Bay. They are Huntington Ingalls Industries, BAE Systems, and NASSCO. They fix the ships that are at the 32nd station. And they are responsible under contract with the Navy to provide security for those ships, whether that's on the water side or on the land side. So the contracts that the Navy gives to these ships, these shipyards, which are worth billions of dollars. We pulled data from 2017 and 2018. It was more than $2 billion just to these 3 shipyards. Those contracts come along with the requirement that these shipyards adhere to these federal regulations, which say in black and white, you need to have this many patrol boats 24/7. The patrol boats need to do this, this, and this. But we found that they're not always providing that.
And again, those contracts say that they've got to have the security in black and white.
Yeah, and the Navy has confirmed that those contracts say that as well. We've been fighting for those contracts for more than a year with the Navy.
That shouldn't be all public record, right? I mean,
well, it depends who you talk to. So to me, yeah, I think they should be public record.
Granted, we're talking about, I mean, we have to be fair that we're talking about security issues. They're not going to give you the nuts and the bolts and the details to broadcast to everybody
but
about.
We already know how much the contracts are worth. Those are public. But what we've asked for is the line items within those contracts. How much are you allocating specifically for security? That we cannot get a handle on. Even I talked to Congressman Scott Peters. His office asked. They will not even tell him. So we don't know exactly how much they're paying for security.
Okay, now we mentioned the outset, the concerns are gaps in the security, vulnerabilities. What are we talking about specifically?
So each shipyard should have 1 waterborne security patrol boat for every 3 Navy warships that are in the shipyard. I went out 3 different times over 3 different months and looked at each shipyard, saw that Huntington Ingalls never had a patrol boat ever. At one point in September, they had 2 Navy warships stationed there. NASSCO BAE also had either 1 patrol boat or none, and they had anywhere from 4 to 6 Navy warships stationed there. So what we saw was just this very apparent lack of patrols.
Do you think it's laziness or incompetence, or the contractors trying to shortchange the Navy and not pay wages?
Bucks, yeah.
I can't say why they're doing this. It seems I should point out, these are not small companies, these shipyards. These are multinational, publicly traded companies and with billions and billions of dollars. So it doesn't seem like it would take that much to just hire an extra boat to have it there. I don't know why they're not doing it. I think a lot of the responsibility rests on the Navy. I have asked them multiple times for how many times have you been out there in the last year? How many times have you audited these shipyards? And they just keep coming back with the same line, which is the shipyards are in compliance and we're not telling you any more information.
Now, you did quote in your story a Navy lieutenant commander about security in the Bay. What did he have to say? Who is he and what did he do?
Former lieutenant Navy commander. His name is Joseph Allen. He's the CEO of 6 Maritime, which is a maritime security company based in Florida, but they do some work here. I was just at an industry conference, a security conference, where he was speaking along with the captain of the harbor police and some others, and he made this statement about these gaps in security that he saw. When I asked him later about it, he wouldn't go into specific detail, but he said what he sees on the Bay scares him. And so we spoke to some other people, one guy in the story, Michael Owen, former Marine, who was out with a buddy fishing a couple years ago and noticed this. He said they always have a combat mindset, and him and a buddy, while fishing, saw these shipyards and said this scared them. So they actually wrote to Peters in 2016 about this.
And so what's at risk here? Is it that, you know, somebody will infiltrate this area and then steal our technology? Is it that, you know, there's somebody will come in and sabotage a ship? What's actually the reason for all this security?
I think it's all of that, but I think the main one is sabotage. It is not, those shipyards are right next to the lane in San Diego Bay, the shipping lane. So you could just take a hard left, and the barriers that they have there are not barely barriers at all. You could drive any boat right into there and do whatever you wanted to those ships if you were so inclined.
Now, you try to get some comments too from HII, some of the big the contractors here who have these federal contracts for the repairs, and they're not talking.
So HII just says they're fully compliant. So each of these shipyards, I offered to send them all my photos and all my videos and all of my notes showing in black and white there's nothing here. HII would not respond to that. They just said they're in compliance. BAE issued a similar statement, but they have since put out another boat, so they appear to be in compliance. NASCO, the same thing. They have not taken me up on my offer to send them photos and videos, but they said that they are in compliance, and they made reference to some deal they had worked out with the Navy where one of their ships that was under repair didn't need to be secured.
Have you noticed any changes since they've become aware that you're snooping around?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. They have, like I said, BAE, second boat in the water. I've heard from sources out on the water that they're taking this seriously. At least NASCO and BAE are. I have not been out in the last month or so to see exactly what's going on with Huntington Ingalls, but as far as I know, they are still not putting boats out there.
Well, just as a citizen taxpayer, longtime resident here, and spend my amount of time down in the bay, and everybody has seen those ships in the repair yards. You can see them Coronado Bridge as you go across. You'd think they want to be a show of force. You'd think they want to have these boats out there kind of showing the flag, and anybody who has any nefarious thing in mind, hey, we're here, folks, and we're on the job.
Yeah, you would think, again, going back to the coal, lessons learned, this was a top priority after the coal. Of waterborne terrorist threats are a huge thing. They called it the Achilles heel of the U.S. Navy. And these boats, again, are not just there to, if an attack happens, to respond, but to, like you said, deter. They're a show of force. They're there to show that we are protecting our assets here in San Diego. And this is the home of the Pacific Fleet. This is not a small, this is a Navy town. And so you would think that this would be a priority for them, but as we found, it's not.
Little time left on this segment. Do you think we might see hearings on this, even closed hearings in Congress? Maybe we got the Democrats coming into the House, maybe some more watchdog on this issue?
So after I talked to Congressman Peters, he said that he has put out a request to the House Armed Services Committee. There are two different subcommittees of that overall committee. I think he's waiting to hear back. I've reached out to Congresswoman Susan Davis, and she has not had a comment on this. I've reached out to others as well, but I think within the next couple of weeks we're going to see some action as to what's going to happen in the new year as possibly hearings.
With the priorities and the oversight. Oh, something to watch for, follow up on. It's a good story. Well, we're going to move on. The fierce political rhetoric and debate over refugees seeking asylum in the United States is not known for subtlety and nuance. A war of words rages from Washington to the border, both sides of it. And as in any war, truth is the first casualty. And your story this week was really interesting. It focused on thousands of asylum seekers in Central America. We've talked a lot about this on the show. It's been in the news, of course. But start there. What's being said about them in Tijuana?
Well, so they've been facing a lot of criticism from people in Tijuana, even from the mayor and other government officials, basically for their requests for food and shelter, for some of the protests that they've put on and things like that. They're being criticized as kind of ungrateful and willing to kind of work and pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
So it's and we were talking a little earlier, it's kind of the idea that the new folks here are just kind of demonized. That's what we do with immigrants, and it's kind of a universal thing. Yeah. Well, let's talk specifics now. Your story features on a young Haitian immigrant who was in this position himself, along with thousands of others, just a few years back, fleeing these horrible conditions in Haiti. And he's a young man. He's written a book about his experience. Who is he, and what's the book about?
So his name is Agustin Pascal Duisson, and he is a Haitian immigrant in Tijuana. He's about 25 years old, and he arrived 2 years ago. He left Haiti in 2014 after the earthquake, and like many Haitians, he went to Brazil because there was a lot of work there around the time of the World Cup. When the World Cup ended, some of the economic opportunities in Brazil also ended for these immigrants, and they made the journey from Brazil to Tijuana. Many were hoping to enter the U.S., because there was a special temporary status for people from Haiti at the time. But some people missed the cutoff, or once they got here decided that they didn't want to cross, and now there's a population of roughly 3,000 or 4,000 Haitians in Tijuana.
Okay, fairly large community, not in the sense of how big Tijuana is, but that's a few thousand people.
Yeah.
So what does he say about how members of the Haitian community in Tijuana are actually being used to discriminate against refugees from places like Honduras and Central America?
Yeah, so you're hearing it all the time in Tijuana. I've heard it from everyone from taxi drivers, and the mayor himself has even said it multiple times. And they'll say, you know, why aren't these Central Americans like the Haitians? The Haitians came, they didn't cause any problems, they didn't ask us for anything, they just started working. And they kind of use that to paint the Central Americans as kind of lazy or ungrateful or kind of not doing what they should be doing.
So pitting one against the other.
Yes, it's kind of creating a model minority situation.
Model minority. Yeah. Now, what is his reaction to this kind of stereotyping?
He does not like it. He doesn't appreciate it. He kind of feels that all immigrants have been in a similar situation and know what they're going through, and he thinks that it's a way of criticizing one group, and at any point that it can be turned against the Haitians at the same time. And he feels that no one understands what the Central Americans are going through, as well as groups like these Haitian immigrants who made, you know, essentially a very similar journey on foot to get here.
Right, and that's the commonality of it, right? And he talks about that, and your story talked about that.
Yeah, you know, he talks about kind of what it means to be so desperate and to want, you know, either asylum or, you know, the economic opportunity to cross Mexico and Central America on foot. I mean, I don't think that it's not an easy journey at all, and I don't think it's a decision that people tend to make lightly.
The main part of his message is, as we said, that common experience and the horrors that they were fleeing in Haiti. They're different, but they are just as extreme as these folks from Central America that are coming in and trying to seek asylum.
Yeah, I mean, there's some differences, but in general, there's very little economic opportunity, and there are governments that don't seem to be able to provide anything to their people.
Right. And, you know, that's something that's lost in this debate. And, of course, you heard Trump and his administration and the Republican side, frankly, demonize a lot of refugees, and the terrorists are coming in and gang members are coming in, et cetera here. But, you know, it gets lost that the conditions in these places are horrible. That's why you have these international laws and the treaties that we're part of to seek asylum in the first place here. I mean, is much being done at all from Washington aspect to try and improve conditions in Central America, to try to keep, you know, things better so people will stay home and try to thrive in their own countries?
Well, the most recent thing that we've actually seen has been Mexico stepping up and trying to provide a significant amount of money to Central America to try and help better the situation there. The U.S. has had some programs in the past to try and combat gang issues in certain neighborhoods in Honduras and things like that. But this administration, the priority seems to be what's happening at the border rather than the root of the problem. And
of course, we had that terrible story just in the news in the last 24 hours of the 7-year-old girl who has died in custody.
Yeah.
Which you know, brings a whole other aspect to it. I wanted to wonder if in a few years we might be having the same discussion about the Central Americans if they stay and form a community in Tijuana, some thousands of them perhaps, where they would be assimilated and accepted, and maybe some other newcomers from somewhere else will be demonized.
I mean, it's certainly possible. Tijuana is kind of at the U.S. front door, and it's one of the largest cities along the U.S.-Mexico border.
People don't realize just how big Tijuana is.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's right on the coast, and it's right at San Diego's doorstep, and so it's always been a place where immigrants have come from all over Mexico and now from other countries as well.
I did want to note another thing we touched on earlier before the show. A UN refugee agency reported some 68 million refugees from war, conflict, persecution in shelters worldwide in 2017, which is an incredible number. 16 million of them were just displaced that year. So it seems like we're going to be dealing with this issue. Climate change may create millions more refugees. We've got an election season coming up. Is this going to be a topic of asylum seekers and immigration?
Oh, definitely. I mean, this is something that this presidential administration has always made a centerfold of its policies, and we saw them ramp up rhetoric against the caravan back before the midterms. It happened during his presidential campaign in 2016, and I think that we'll definitely be seeing it in the next year and a half as they ramp up for 2020.
Right. Now, Trump dominated this issue in that 2016 campaign that you're referencing. And of course, just emerging now are some of the Democratic candidates. It's difficult to take the opposite tact. Everybody talks about border security. How do you get a nuanced thing when you have a kind of a demonization going on in the rhetoric?
It's kind of difficult because right now it seems like a lot of the Democrats are just reacting to things that happen, and they aren't really presenting a plan on how to address anything either. So it makes it harder to kind of sell a message.
Right. And Trump's overall immigration, even legal immigration, cut out all immigrants. I mean,
yeah, his message is very clear. It's just reduce immigration. Yeah.
Right. Which seems, short-sighted anyway because of the worker shortage and birth rates and other issues that we can get into on another show since we're out of time. But fascinating stuff. A lot of angles to that story there. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. And I'd like to thank my guest, David Garrick of the San Diego Union Tribune, Brad Racino of iNewsSource, Andrew Bowen of KPBS News, and Maya Sri Krishnan of Voice of San Diego. And a reminder, all the stories that we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. Well, thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Sauer, and join us again next Friday on The Roundtable.